Hi, Art.
Hello.
I don't know if Vivian's here. There's Birdie.
Oh, hey. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. A little wind blown from church.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa, it was windy.
Wow. Yeah, when I'm looking outside now, I do see, uh-oh, I gotta turn off. That was my alarm to make sure I logged in on time. I see like my trees are blowing out there.
Yeah.
Windy day, but nice and bright.
I wish we had longer with this book. I wish it weren't just 6 weeks.
Right.
That's
Yeah. It's been very interesting, like, and eye-opening for me for sure. I see Art has a new background. It looks, what is that, Lake Belton?
Lake.
That's the view out the window. If I look off to my right, that's almost exactly what I see.
Wow.
I thought that would look like it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, we suffer through with it.
Birdie, did you do Tuesday night? I can't remember who, because I couldn't see everybody.
Right. Yeah, I did. I logged on like right when the movie began, and that was a very interesting like story. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know a lot of the things. I didn't know exactly how like the slave trade, like exactly how it worked. So it was interesting to see how things would come from Rhode Island, that they would trade in Africa, and then they trade some slaves in the Caribbean, or I think they were in Cuba and part of it, and then to get sugar cane to go back. So I was like, wow.
So they could make the run.
Right.
To trade. Yeah, also a lot of shipbuilding. A lot of shipbuilding.
Right.
From the mountains of New England. Yeah.
And yeah, and how the whole town kind of was founded on, you know, and supporting like the slave trade at that time. So it was like, that was all new information for me. And so I'm looking forward to this week to hear from I guess the person who's like kind of started the whole project, her family, or
at least one of the people that went on the trip. I'm not Neil, or
I can't remember who exactly. Good morning.
Good morning.
There's Diane.
Or afternoon.
Oh, that's right. I still say it. I gotta write that down.
There's Nancy.
Good morning. Or afternoon. I'm still doing it.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Nancy.
I still do it. Yeah. So we'll wait just a few more minutes to see who joins. I know Miss Carrie said she might not be able to join. And then
She was in Dallas this weekend.
okay. And then Miss Flo, she called and said she wouldn't be able to join us today. So morning or afternoon. I'm not gonna get it right until it's over.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah. Let's see what. Did anyone else have any comments on the Traces of the Trade movie that was showed earlier this week or last week on Tuesday?
You know, I am sure that the man from Houston said we had an institutional license. Didn't he? For the film?
I can't remember. I was just logging on when he was talking about that.
Yeah, I don't remember if that was the beginning or the end, but and I was trying to show it to somebody, and then I said, whoops, oh, I thought we had a license, and I was going to encourage them to watch it, but I said you'd have to pay for it.
Yeah, he said that we have a license. He has a license to show it through Episcopal Health Foundation, I suppose.
Oh, but not us get it.
We can buy it or rent it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vimeo, I think it was.
Yeah.
One of those services.
I had a friend that went out and bought it as soon as I told her about it.
Mhm.
And what the whole thing is, the entire full-length documentary is something like 6 hours.
Whoa.
It had something that was 6 hours and something that was an hour and something. There were like 5 different offerings or something. I think ours was about an hour and a half, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Right.
All right. Yeah. It
Are
was
y'all
nice.
talking about the Trace video?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it yet.
Interesting. I liked it. It was a good like eye opener. Like, wow, you know.
It was. I liked it because it was from a different perspective. And I mean, what we've been working on so far in our classes, which is what's catching me up and expanding what I'm learning, is it's taken from the perspective of, this is what we've done in the United States to keep people that aren't white from having economic opportunities, education opportunities, etc. And here's some of the problems you're having with the police. But never from the standpoint of we are related to people who were slaveholders. And, you know, there are other things that people can have their families involved in that would be repressive, but that's about as big as it gets. And that's a great way to approach the subject.
They weren't just it was traders.
Traders, yeah, excuse me.
Dealing with many, many, many more than what ordinary, even slaveholders in America would.
Right.
Did you all realize that probably, I can't remember the exact statistics, 93, somewhere between 90 and 95% of captured Africans were not taken to the United States. They were taken to Latin America and South.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That was interesting for me because like when I first went to I had a friend whose family lived in Bermuda for a while, and my husband and I went to visit there, and I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to stick out like a sore thumb over there. And she's like, no, you're not. Quite like a dark skinned population, you know, with African roots. And I was like, what? So yeah, very eye opening.
Bermuda, interesting.
Yeah.
Never been.
They moved back now to Florida, but it's a beautiful island. I love Bermuda, so I hope to go back one day.
I have a friend whose family, excuse me, her family's from Barbados. She is, I think her parents immigrated, so she's a first generation American, and she is of African descent, and she doesn't know a lot about African American history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when her parents said when they arrived here and they realized how prejudiced people were against Black people, they were just shocked. They couldn't understand it. And so she's a priest, and she's had to do a lot of catch up on the history of Africans in America to figure out what's going on.
My son has a good friend from Greece, and she came over here for college and is now teaching. First, it was like Liberty. I think she taught in Liberty, Texas, and then she's now in Conroe. And as she's going to graduate school, I asked Jonathan, and I said, well, is she going to apply in Texas? She said, oh, no. She said she's horrified by the racism. And, you know, as someone that has an accent also, I mean, she's Caucasian, but that and the politics, she said, I can't stand staying in Texas in August. And the weather in the summer.
Yeah.
Well, is Texas worse than Liberty?
Liberty's in Texas.
And somebody who lived
Texas.
in Liberty for,
Well, she just lived there. I mean, she taught there 1 year. She didn't actually live there.
as someone I did live there for 40 years.
Oh, I know.
I moved here from there, and it is very, well, you know, it's East Texas and it's small town, and there is just a lot of prejudice against, well, I lived there for 40 years, and when I moved away, I was still a newcomer. I'll just tell you that. So, you know, if your family hadn't been there for generations and you're not white, then you don't belong.
Yeah, my mother was from Savannah. I understand. Not much different.
No. Well, hopefully, you know, maybe some of the thoughts that we kind of are going through can help change some of that, you know, those types of communities maybe. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So far, so good. Now I put pause. I don't know how when I do that, it does a pause. Let's see. Let me see if I change. Okay, did it change to, I don't think it did. I don't know what I'm doing to when it pauses it. Share this bar, bring your shared window to the front. Maybe it's, okay, can you see the prayer?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess it worked now. Does anyone want to lead us in our opening prayer?
I will. I haven't done that yet, I don't think.
Thank you.
Let us pray. Oh God, we pray that you will stir the waters and agitate the sleepers of our world, who would rather justify injustice than fight against it, and give your people, your young warriors and crying mothers and broken fathers, the courage to accept nothing less than life. Help us to stand for truth, justice, and righteousness. Give us courage to make our witness against injustice in deep and abiding love. Amen.
Thank you so much for leading us. Oh, what happened? That's hilarious. Well, I'll just read. This week we're covering From Warriors to Guardians, Reforming the Criminal Justice System. And it's covering chapters 2, 7, and 8. So I know that's a lot of I don't know what happened to my pictures. That's hilarious. Okay. So, but before we begin, I thought I would just start with a reflection kind of question for the group. Have you recognized any misguided or racially insensitive talk or comments in this past week? And did you feel like a shoulder tap, kind of we discussed last week, where maybe God was prompting you to respond in a certain way? And how did you respond? Does anyone have anything they want to kind of discuss along those lines?
This week, me.
I'm sorry. Art, were you saying something?
I was trying to think what I might have heard this week. I haven't talked to a lot of people.
Okay. Or listen to people on the radio or TV.
Oh, well.
We hear it on the news.
For sure. Sadly enough. Anyone have anything they want to share?
Sadly enough.
Yeah.
I'm looking for something specific.
Well, maybe
Comes to mind. Right.
Nothing comes to mind. Well, that's fine. You know, just something to kind of get us kind of thinking and talking about, kind of looking at the world and seeing like maybe how these ideas that we're discussing, how we see them kind of reflected in the world today. So that's why I kind of just wanted to encourage this morning. I'm gonna try to share the slides again, but I'm sorry, I don't have pictures. They all, I guess, disappeared. But part of the talks today, the book discussed a little bit about racial profiling, and I thought that was an interesting kind of idea I wanted to start with this morning, because the author writes that racial profiling is a sin in the eyes of God. And he mentions that the body of Christ is meant, instructed, and commanded to be racially inclusive. And he points to Galatians 3:28 with regard to that. But when I read that part, what it reminded me of was like the unofficial US motto of E pluribus unum, which means out of many one. And so I started thinking and figuring out like, where did that come from? And I trust me, I think this all might kind of all go together. But what I found that there's a similar phrase to E pluribus unum that says, the one is made up of all things and all things issue from the one. And so then I started reading a little more, and there's a Cicero's paraphrase of Pythagoras, which like way historical type thought leaders, I guess, in their days, that as part of his discussion of the basic family and social bonds as the origins of societies and states, the paraphrase he has is, when each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many. And so I guess all of this was kind of eye-opening to me, because there's a lot of people who would continue to support like nationalism and white nationalism or things of that sort. They always try to say it's like a patriotic type of identity as to why they want to support type racist ideas or things of status quo. But, you know, when I kind of looked into this phrase, it seems like that's like inconsistent with the idea of like the unofficial motto of the United States. And so I just threw it out there as something to kind of think about, is like, if it would be possible that society would embrace a more meaningful understanding of this phrase and kind of push back on those that would try to look toward, like, to try to couch racism or those types of racist ideas, couch them in terms of some sort of nationalism or patriotic kind of understanding of the United States. Does that make sense to anybody else?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Anybody have feedback?
As a matter of fact, that's what our country was founded on, and it just still kind of makes me puzzle about why so many of our founding fathers had slaves. And the thing about it is that they not only did that, they said landholders were the only people who could vote and who were equal, really to be someone. So it wasn't just slaves, but it was all people who didn't own land.
Right. Absolutely. Anyone else have any?
We've had injustices from the very beginning.
Right.
I think that landholder thing probably came out of their experiences in England. But, you know, that whole thing, I think the reality and the attitudes of our founding fathers, who they were because of their backgrounds and where they came from, you know, we're all products of our environment, our upbringing, our education or lack of. And so that's how all of that happened. I think they aspired to better, as many of us do. But I also think that's what the white supremacists and the white nationalists today are basing their philosophy on, was that this country was founded by white people, it was founded for white people, and people who are not white just don't belong here. Or if they must be here, then they shouldn't expect to have equality with those of us who are white.
Right.
Well, one of the main reasons for the power of only white men who are over the age of 21 and were not indentured was because it was originally thought that they were creating a very limited government that was just done for the preservation of property. And if you weren't a property owner, then you would really have no relationship with the government particularly. It was all going to be more local, which meant state. So that's really the why of that. And nobody other than the white male property owners had any political power, had the power to sue or be sued or any of those kinds of things.
Thanks. That's interesting. Yeah, because that's something I didn't know. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Ms. Deacon Glenda, for helping to kind of clarify kind of where I was going with all of that, because that kind of was where I was going with these thoughts this morning. But the next part of that is I wanted to try to to remember and like connect like these thoughts about racism and identity back to like our identity and mission and how it relates to the mission and how we serve Christ and the world here and now. And so in looking at that, I found on one of the Episcopal websites, there's a Towards a Theology of Ministry paper that I saw. And I thought that this quote was really helpful in kind of identifying exactly, you know, some of the connections that I'm hoping that we make in our time together. But I'll read this brief paragraph. Baptism and its call to serve God and the world are Christian identity. Specific roles express that identity in accordance with God's calling to each of us to use our unique gifts in service to God's kingdom. So that's kind of a little quote. And then a little bit further says, baptismal ministry is a rich complex of interconnected callings, service, and relationships. And so it kind of, what I'm hoping that we see is that sometimes when we do see racism or these structures that of inequality in society, that we respond and remember that we won't all have the same response, but we can depend on the gifts that we have and use our relationships in order to bring about change in the places that we are. I know sometimes it thinks that this is a problem that's just, you know, it's historic, it's been many years, it's a problem much bigger than ourselves, but God puts us together to work together so that we can live out the gospel, which is kind of refers to the next quote on the slide, by tearing down these dividing walls, not only by learning and listening to one another, but also by standing up and speaking out for one another. And I also want to kind of, you know, remind everybody that some of this work will be public work and some of it will be private. And what I mean by that is, I just wanted to share kind of a little of my experience that kind of helped me when I was trying to think about, okay, how can I prepare to help kind of move the conversation in our group today in the context of faith and church and community. And many people know that I did grow up in an Episcopal church, but part of that time was mainly because when I was younger, I would only go on Easter. That's the only time I would go to church. But as I grew up older and got into high school, I was able to go to church like each week and got more involved in church. And I'm grateful for that. And the one thing I always remember in my family was that everyone would talk about Father Bosman. And I've mentioned him on one of our church pages before because he was a white man that actually went to Selma and was changed by what he experienced in Selma. And he came back to Houston where he served at a church, which I think was a primarily white church. And that church took action together to create a mission church in my predominantly African-American community. And so that's just one example of how we as individuals can come together in faith and create change. And I really do, even though I don't even know if I met him in person, because, you know, I wasn't interested in remembering names when I was young, but I do recognize the impact that he had in my life and my family and how I was able to do different things and to come out of a very poor socioeconomic background, you know, and see other things in the world. And so, like, even though I may not have even met him, he made an impact and difference in my life. And I'm passing that on to my own children and able to do the work here today in this group. And then I also wanted to point to how we can do private work in our spheres of influence. In that same church, we were like a multiracial church. It started off as predominantly African-American, but it did move to a more diverse community where we did have Anglo people in the church as well. And there was one lady in there, and I remember her name is Miss Stephanie, and that she just, I don't know, was just very helpful to me and spent time with me, talking to me, trying to get to know me on a one-on-one basis, you know. And she, at one point, took me out to lunch one day, one part of my senior year. She's just like, here, I will pick you up. And she came all the way to, I lived in like the ghetto, and she drove like a little Volvo or whatever. And she took the time out of her life on a Saturday, bright sunny day, I still remember it, to pick me up take me to lunch, talk to me, get to know me, and encourage me. And one of the things I remember is that I knew she herself was going through a difficult time, because she shared with me that she had just been laid off, but she was happy to just be able to just think about the goodness of God and to share, you know, the good things that God has done in her life and the hope that she had with me. And, you know, I wish I remembered her last name, because I know that that was very impactful for me, because it showed me that there are other things outside of the small community that I lived in. And so when we talk about how can we do the work of God and reconciliation, we have to think about, there may be public things that we're called to do, serving of others, but also the relationships are important. And so with that, I'm sorry I took up a little bit of time for personal stories, but does anyone else have any ideas of how they might be able to do that, either within the church or experiences where they have had those types of experiences in the past?
Yep. I heard it was a news program. It was about how banks use their funds, and they say, well, actually, yes, when people and companies do have opinions about, well, we don't really want to do business with you unless your policies regarding, I guess, and what we're discussing is race, are in line with what we are hoping for or needing to have, as we've agreed as a business or as a community. And in the case of the community, it was writing letters. So the business could apply pressure or have needs as far as policy was concerned. Community could write letters and be active in that way. I guess also through city council meetings or zoning board meetings, that kind of thing. I heard another gentleman saying he was an airplane pilot, and he noticed that there's so many people. Becky's not with us today, but so many people taking retirement and early retirement as pilots these days. He's supporting, I think it was 5 kids who probably wouldn't have considered flying otherwise, but he's taking them out to the local small airport, and they're getting introduced that way, taking out of the neighborhood and into something new. And then what was the third thing? Just being a coach for teams. That a lot of people do that, and you don't necessarily do it just from your own neighborhood. That's all I have.
Anyone else?
Well, I don't know if I could do this or not. I'm retired, but I still get a lot of information about what my the American Professional Society is doing. That society is called the American Association of Physicists in Medicine. And just recently, I was just trying to look it up real quick. I got an email that there's about recently formed committees in the AAPM. The AAPM isn't that huge professional society, but boy, does it have a lot of committees. But I was very proud of them. They have a what's called a working group that has just been formed to work on and provide guidance and training on what they call inclusivity. But it's basically trying to keep the AAPM from being racist. It has to do with very carefully looking at how AAPM funding for students is directed, and also making sure that there is inclusivity considered in making appointments to important committee positions, in particular committee chairs. I've been so inactive and so withdrawn into my retirement. I'm not sure I could get into that, but I might try.
To add that our Deacon Becky is involved in so many areas, and she's really has talked to us on our small group about the Impact Church and some of the plans they have, and hope that our church could help getting involved with that. And that's an exciting idea. And that would really be a way to work with families of different origin than myself, you know? Get to know them, get to speak with them and learn about them, and they can learn about me.
I'll have to look into the Impact Church. I hadn't heard of it, but maybe we can find out some more information about that to share with everybody.
Well, they're located down Adams at, do you have the address or the name of the building or where they're next door to? Not far away.
No, it's just
Go ahead.
around 4th Street. It's really close to us. It's not that far down.
Oh, so Adams and 4th?
Around there, I think. It's not where
Okay.
isn't that the old fish store used to be, the pet store?
Yeah, on the northeast corner, and they work a lot. They're growing microgreens and then teaching classes in the neighborhood on how to have better diet. There's a realization that it's a food desert in East Temple, but they're growing in many other ways as well.
Becky said that they were looking to purchase a house where they could set up for classes and things, and you could have a little coffee clutch there, and any number of ways that you could be involved in getting to know the church and their people, and they could get to work with us as well. I'm intrigued by it.
I'll look and see if we can find some more information on that. That sounds like a good opportunity as well.
Helping Hands in Belton runs a program, and I'm not sure if it's up and running now because of COVID, but I talked with them just before all this started, and I can't remember what exactly what it's called. It's something table, and the churches in particular get a small group of people together to work with one family for, I think it's for a year, to help them learn about things like handling money and controlling their debt and family relationships and responsibility and those kinds of things. And, and that's not to say that only families of color have those problems or have those needs, but I think, that's something that Christ Church could be involved in down the line when we ever open up, after COVID. And we have enough people at Christ Church who have it doesn't require a lot of expertise, but we have enough people that have some knowledge of how to live in the world that we could probably run 2 or 3 of those tables and help 2 or 3 families a year.
Thank you. That is a wonderful opportunity that hopefully, when everything kind of settles, that maybe we can go and take a part in. This brings me to the discussion question that we kind of had for this week, and about the policing and racial profiling, things of that sort. So I just brought together a few quotes here just to kind of get us started, but I'll go back and I'll read the question for this week. Was, what steps of those outlined in chapter 7 or that you might come up with on your own do you feel would be most effective at reforming the criminal justice system? And what are the main obstacles to making those happen? And how can those obstacles be overcome? And so in light of that, I brought together a few thoughts from some of what we saw. in the book where the author discusses Ferguson, Baltimore, and I put and beyond because here in the Bell County area, we've had our own experience with a police officer shooting with the case of Michael Dean. And so I just kind of highlighted some quotes here about the author states that there's been some consistently abusive policing aimed at balancing the budgets on the backs of the poorest citizens. And so part of that was some of these dubious ordinances, such as a violation for manner of walking, and that dog bite victims in the particular Ferguson area, they were 100% Black. This idea of a new Jim Crow, which is systemic disenfranchisement, and how ghetto communities are swept for the low-hanging fruit. And so does anyone have any ideas or thoughts about some of the ideas raised in this portion of the book?
Yeah, it's just really concerning when I saw what the statistic gave for 5 people who are users of illegal substance to 1 person who is a distributor arrested. That seems to be a use of policing that needs to be rethought. And it seems obvious. I remember one time I saw an entire show about the use of the RICO law in New York. I think that's a national law, isn't it? But anyway, they had to be taught how to use it, and then they started going after people who weren't users. They were going after distributors, and with great success. I would feel terrible being being a kid between the ages, say, 16 and 22 or something like that, and walking in my neighborhood knowing that this, a statistic like that, it would be so frightening.
One of the things I thought of as I was reading about the war on drugs was how complicit, I guess, I was without realizing it during that time, and you know, up to now, because I remember that drugs were beginning to be more and more of a problem. And so when the government comes out and says, you know, we're gonna wage a war on drugs and we're gonna get the drugs off the street and all of that, I just assumed that they were going after drug dealers and distributors and those people, and that you know, the casual user. And you know, I'm of an age where I had many friends who were casual users. I didn't realize that those people were the ones that they were going to be focusing on, and that it would be in the communities of people of color. I did wonder at times. I have one particular friend who has been a marijuana user for a long, long time, and he's been stopped, you know, for traffic things and that sort of thing. And I have wondered how he never got arrested for possession or driving under the influence or anything like that. And I now realize it's because he's white, you know.
That's right.
Mm.
Anyone else have anything they want to share?
Well, I think, one of the focuses later on in the war on drugs was to stop the demand. And if you stop the demand, you'll stop the production and the sale and distribution and all that. But that doesn't mean just getting those people off the streets. It means a whole, you know, educational program as to drugs and how harmful they can be. It's kind of like the whole pregnancy issue. Why can't, you know, if we can stop teen pregnancy and, you know, work on something in that respect, and or sex education, which so many people are against, then that would hopefully stop a lot of the need for people later on to have abortions or whatever. It's just, you know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and how do you fix that? I don't know.
And, you know, one of the things that we did not do during that time, or have not done really, is provide drug treatment. You know, one of our sons started using drugs in high school, and we started looking for drug treatment for him. And and in those days, insurance did not have to cover that. So we didn't have any insurance to cover it. And, you know, we went to center after center after center, and their response was, well, I'm sorry, you know, if you don't have insurance and you can't pay this outrageous, I mean, it was really a lot, fee, then there's nothing we can do to help you.
That is like unfortunate and kind of part of the problem that, you know, sometimes, and I guess I do have a slide about this a little bit later, but, you know, there's a thought of criminal justice as retribution versus the author here talks about some sort of like restorative type justice system that might be something that we could kind of hope for and aspire to in the future. But I thought that this part was very interesting to me as a former prosecutor, but I only prosecuted misdemeanors from like the traffic tickets that they're talking about, and only to like things like DWIs, the marijuana, things of that sort. And what, from my experience, what made it difficult for me to be okay with that situation was that there's so much discretion at all different levels of the process, from the interaction, police encounter, all the way up to the prosecutor's charging of the crime, and also the recommendation for the punishment. That each person in that position of authority has to kind of look back and fall back on their own morals and beliefs and understandings, and, you know, what they believe about the person in front of them, and that influences how they respond in a situation. And in a lot of cases, their decision will be, you know, they won't be second guessed, honestly, and from my experience, what I've seen. And so it's hard to kind of, for me, it was very difficult to just be okay with things going, you know, just as is, because a lot of what I read in the chapters also talks about money and budgets. And I've also been in that place where there, you know, preparing city budgets, there is a line item when you're filling out the city budget and the police budget, there's a line item for fines in there. And so you kind of are expected to bring in a certain amount of income on fines. And who's going to pay the fines? What's an easy way to get collect fine money is to kind of exploit people in poor areas or people of color, because you know that they won't fight back, you know. And, you know, it was kind of unsaid things that I've experienced like along the lines. And so I did see a lot of truth in kind of some of the statements that were made in these chapters, unfortunately. And so then my question is, what do you do about it? For me, I did leave that, and, you know, part of it is I felt like I had to be there to make a change in that place. But after a few years, I said, I'm becoming more of the problem, and I want to be more of the solution. So you kind of have to, you know, it costs something. You have to find a new place, a new job, new friends. Sometimes you kind of, you know, but ultimately, if you feel God has called you to that, then it's, you know, for me, I feel like it was worth it, you know, because I knew I couldn't continue to be a part of a place where I wasn't being helpful, and I wasn't being able to help more people in that way. Anyone else have any comments?
Oh, can't the same mostly be said about, say, posting bail? There are many small crimes, and people of means can post bail and be out of jail. And many who get left in the county jails are those who simply don't have the money to post bail. And so I think that we often have a different judicial system for the rich versus the poor.
I have definitely seen that. Yes, for sure. Even in small town Bell County, yeah.
I don't remember the statistics, but in Harris County, which is maybe after New York City, the biggest jail system in the country, a large percentage of the people that are in that jail have been convicted of nothing, but they could not post bail, and so they're in there, and their cases, the dockets are full, and the cases get put off, and they sit there for 2 and 3 and 4 years without ever having a trial because they can't post bail. They lose their families, they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, they lose everything because they couldn't post bail on something that might have been pretty minor.
And that kind of reminds me, as a prosecutor, you never want to be seen as soft on crime. And so, but what I've found sometimes in interactions with some of my colleagues was that they are, I guess, probably disillusioned by the reports that we read every day. And it seems like it's the same old people all the time. And these same old people just usually are Black and Hispanic. And I'm just kind of saying this is what I've seen. And so sometimes some of my colleagues who thought that they were, just telling the story as is would use words and phrases to make it seem like they were in touch with the street. But it really just highlighted kind of some of the biases that they had towards the people that they were supposed to be prosecuting at the time. And so one of the things I thought is definitely, if you are going to be a prosecutor, you really have to have meaningful bias training or understanding and awareness, because even though we see like street slang about what drugs are and what type of scams people pull, you got to remember you're dealing with human beings in this process, and each face is different. Even though people say there's nothing new under the sun, people, it's easy to be. It's easy to discount the humanity in people if you see some of the some very difficult people every day, and you're trying to, you have this idealization that you're gonna get justice, but then you're dealing with people who make, they're not making the best decisions all the time. And so I think that's one thing that would definitely help, is just more awareness and understanding, and that you are dealing with human beings that were created in the image of God. These are not just numbers. These are not just figures, statistics or fines or anything like that. But we have to recognize the dignity of humans when we're interacting with them, even when they've stumbled and made the wrong decisions. And it's not that you're being soft on crime. It's that you want to do the right thing. And so, I don't know, it's just some thoughts that I had. Anybody else?
Well, it seems like... Go ahead.
Hi, Valerie. I was, my former marriage was to the DA. And I think as he lived his job every day and came home with the issues, it was very hard, if you see fearful bad things all day long, to stay the same. Because, and whether you go into a situation with your own values and your own biases, it's very difficult if your job doesn't have much respite to it. If all you're dealing with all day long are the hardest, most difficult cases, then I think it's really impossible not to get hardened yourself in one way or another. I mean, you have to, like you said, be reminded that these are people that are human beings, and to be reminded of the deep questions like we're having here. I mean, how many times do we discuss this with people? We don't discuss it very often. And when you are the DA, like you said, you need to be tough on crime. And so some of the hardest decisions he had to make were when friends called him for a special treatment for their child, and usually they were white, and he would have to say no. Well, it didn't make him very popular. So I think that our work takes a toll on us too. That's why it's important to break it up with discussion, with reading, with other things besides that hard job all the time. I think ER doctors or others that are, they see the hardest cases all the time, and so they categorize people as lumps instead of individuals. They put them in a group. You should see who's in the ER, and I see this all the time. They're all drug addicts and they're all black. I mean, you know, we start making, I think he talks about this a lot in the book, where we start categorizing one person with a group, and we start living out those ideologies that go with the group instead of seeing people, each of them, as an individual and a child of God.
Miss Valerie, did you have something?
Well, I was going to say, you know, looking at the book, it seems like the whole, you know, many of the whole issues start when people are so young, you know, like in school, and they're talking about, you know, statistically Black kids, you know, male and female, are more likely to be suspended or expelled, often for, you know, for not getting, you know, for something that's pretty minor, as in the cash bail and different instances of that. And it seems like they talk about in chapter 8, restorative justice. That's kind of an entirely different focus than the I can't think of the word right now, but the other kind of justice, where and that if you had that different viewpoint or focus, then you would have to start with children, and then, you know, and change things bit by bit. And I realize that's not something that's just going to happen overnight, but it's something that we have to talk about and be willing to talk about now, and to make changes as now, I think.
Agree.
Absolutely.
And it's easier to work with children and people that teach those children to make those changes rather than when they're adults, and it becomes more fearful for them.
And that kind of reminded me of there's a portion about this school to prison pipeline. And I just took a few quotes from there. Let's see. I think I figured it out. Oh, sorry about that. School skipped all the way back here. School to prison pipeline, where they talk about students are suspended or expelled. Sorry, I'm gonna have to, I don't know, I'm having bad luck with the technology this go around. But students are
up there.
Okay, suspended, expelled, or even arrested for minor offenses. Then they're forced out of school for being disruptive and going back to, you know, these environments that have negative influences. And then they go on to kind of commit crimes and then end up, you know, as they're saying here, like in basically jails or prisons. And, you know, unfortunately, I saw myself in this as well. And that's part of the reason I was kind of okay with my decision to leave the county attorney's office, because I worked in truancy court, and, you know, all these things that were kind of little whispers or taps on the shoulder during that time was like, are you okay with this? You know, do people forget that you're African American? Because I think that's part of it sometimes, is that just I'm kind of laid back, and you know, some of the things I say or do, people have said to me, Birdie, you're not really Black, or, you know, you're the whitest Black girl I've ever known. And, you know, they don't mean any harm by it. Some people are true friends. It's just like inappropriate, kind of like dismissive type things. And so I had to ask myself, am I okay with the role that I'm playing in this environment? And for a while I was, but then after a while I said, you know, I can't go on like that. I don't think this is, you know, how I can help the situation of people. And part of that was because sometimes in the school to prison pipeline idea that is put forth, there's sometimes zero tolerance policies in place. And, you know, sometimes I wonder, are these zero tolerance policies appropriate for some children and youth? Because some children are very immature and they don't understand or they don't mean it. But, you know, if you have a zero tolerance rule, sometimes it's not zero tolerance for everybody is another thing that you kind of think about. But how can we advocate for change or reform in this school to prison pipeline that's discussed in the book?
Well, the sad story was about the young man who forgot his name badge or whatever it was to get into school.
Right.
And they wouldn't even allow him to even give the reason. And they kicked him out, and police officers wanted to know why he was wandering around and not at school. And they ended up finding them about $600. To me, now, if that had been a white child, I think it would have been very different. They would have been allowed to explain, okay, maybe there's a problem here. Takes me back to a story I just read. We picked up I went to the sculpture garden in Lampasas yesterday. And I picked up this little catalog thing that they had there, a little newspaper. And there was a woman talking about, she hurried from her home. She had to do something. She left her purse at home. So she didn't have her driver's license. And she was stopped by a policeman. And he said, well, okay, could we verify, he was going to verify that she had a license. And then her insurance thing was out of date. So then she found one and it expired. So she was going to say, call my husband. She went through a series of things and the officer ended up giving her a warning. And at the very end of the article, she said, if I had been another color, if I hadn't been white. And so often we need to think about that. We need to think about that there is a difference. There's another standard. And the thing that struck me the most in the book and the chapters, when they were talking about changing the policemen from warriors to guardians, if that would happen, because as we see at the protest, they line up military and they've got their weapons and, they've got their headgear and whatever. But in policemen, and I know that they need to protect themselves. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for, as he said, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. But it seems to me that there should be a different, something in the training or maybe getting together with citizens and talking about how can we interact. And that thing about getting out in the neighborhoods, now I know some of our policemen do that, but it's just, if the word guardian stuck in my mind so heavily, if we could have that as instead of warriors, guardians, I think it would make all the difference in the world of how people would be treated, whatever color or whatever gender they are. Anyway.
Had you wrapped it up, Gloria? I'm sorry. Yeah, what you're saying brings to mind two stories that I had heard. One was, one is, you take, for example, when some of the monuments were being torn down. I heard a story about in Britain, there was it was in Bristol, which is a southern seaport town in England. They were tearing down a monument and police showed up and it got rolled into the harbor. Well, in their system, it's more guardianship. They don't carry weapons. And again, they don't carry weapons because, which takes us to another topic. We have so many weapons here. If the cops didn't have weapons, they couldn't be cops, to my mind. But they decided to stand back from the protest because they were guardians of the community. It wasn't time to intervene. So many community members and so few police officers. And later on, they got the statue out of the harbor because you can do that with machines. And now it's no longer on the pedestal it was because they were having a discussion in the city council and it ended up somewhere else. But you can put off things till later.
Right.
But then again, when you have armed people in the United States, it makes it a very different situation than it does just about anywhere else in the world because of the amount of weapons we have on people walking around in communities and during protests in general.
Especially when you see the community.
Go ahead.
When you see the communities when they're sending military like tanks and and big, huge, whatever they're called. I'm not sure. I know Amy said when she went through Leadership Temple, they took her out to this one place where they have all the vehicles, you know, that they use for SWAT teams. And Amy asked, well, how often do you use that in Temple? You know, which is not very often, but they've got this huge thing that they use for the SWAT team. I'm not sure that that's really telling the community what's really needed. I'm not sure. I know we need things to police. I realize that. But do we need tanks? Do we need all of this stuff?
Those are called armored personnel carriers. You can't shoot through the walls of the vehicle, and so it makes it safer to transport officers from point A to point B.
Right. I do understand that, but
Well, what about ordinary citizens carrying these weapons that go over their back? And I don't know anything about guns, but
legal, and that paints a very different picture. Yeah, it's a concern in a big way.
it is a concern.
It is.
Miss Nancy,
Sure
did
is.
you have something you wanted to add?
Just going to say, I don't remember exactly what years it was, but the government had all this excess military equipment that they were turning over to the police departments. And that's how they got these tanks and armored vehicles and everything else, a lot of them. And I think now looking back, I think that was probably not a good idea.
You can say that, but on the other hand, if I were a police officer with all the weapons that are out in public, and we've read stories about people, there have been shootouts, I think it was Philadelphia, and the police had to break into a store where weapons were sold so they could match the firepower of the people who were creating the problem of that day. It's a very different situation we have here. And what
I wanted to say something about Gloria's thing. You know, you wish that we didn't have to have that, but if it was you at your house and you needed somebody to come and save you, you might feel differently about it.
Well, I know that we're needed. I think that we've overemphasized that. And when we talk about everybody carrying guns, I'm not against anybody owning guns, but I am against responsible and background checks and that sort of thing. So when I look at things on TV and there are people actually going to rallies or peaceful protests, and they've got citizens lined up with whatever those weapons, I don't even know what they're called, but they look like something you'd go into a battle with, you know. And I'm thinking, am I living in this time? It really is kind of frightening that that's allowed. But no, I agree. I think the police should have all the protection they need. But I think we need to talk about being guardians and actually working with people. I know that sounds idealistic, but even Jim Wallace is talking about having guardians. Maybe we can change. It's all the change of a culture and how people think and how they act. I know it's not possible. I know it's probably not realistic, but at least we can have this conversation about it. We can start the conversation.
Well, I think, I've been a part of a school where they were using restorative justice, and it takes a while to work, to do it. But I think it's something that you can begin and then make changes, and you have to start somewhere, I think it is important to do.
I think it starts with no corporal punishment in schools, because I think that students of color usually get, it's not a pun, but they get the hard end of the stick more than students, white students. And I think it begins with outlawing corporal punishment.
So that's all that I had for today. It's about 1:30. Does anybody else have any other points that they wanted to bring up or discuss?
This has maybe nothing to do with anything, but several years ago, the state of Texas changed the prison system from the Texas Department of Corrections to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And that disturbed me and still does, because I think it takes the emphasis from rehabilitation to we're going to put these people in prison and keep them there for however long, you know.
Well, I know when I was working, this isn't exactly about corrections, but just rehabilitation. When I worked at Feed My Sheep, the office, there were a lot of people that came in that had gotten out of jail and they did not have an ID. And in our county, I don't know if this is true over the whole state of Texas, but you had to have, to get an ID, you had to have 3 pieces of mail, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, besides your birth certificate. So imagine you can't get a job most places for 90 days because you don't have an ID. So then what are you going to do? Not legal work. So
well, you can't get a job, you can't get food stamps, you can't get rent assistance, you can't get any of that.
Yeah, and so why does Texas have that line? I was reading about in Oklahoma now, when someone gets out of jail, part of getting out of jail, you get an ID. That seems to make very reasonable sense to me, that you would have an ID getting out of jail so that you can get a job and that you can do all those other things.
So we should form a group that goes to one of the legislators to
I would like to do that.
this. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and definitely, maybe it's something that legislators just didn't think about, and so maybe it's up to us to, when we see like the gaps or, you know, the inconsistencies, to reach out to our public servants that are supposed to represent our interests in our, you know, where they are.
Hugh Shine's been to our place. He represents us in Temple.
Who?
Hugh Shine, right? That's,
Right.
yeah, his office is around the corner from our church, and he's been into our church.
Oh.
And they need to come around more than just during election time. So
Well, I don't know him, but the things that I read in the paper, you know, like when he goes and visits with Chamber of Commerce. And again, you have to remember that I come out of Deep East Texas, but he seems so reasonable to me and so so truly interested in the good of the community rather than, you know, and y'all know him better than I do, so I may be just crazy, but
Maybe not. Maybe we don't know him better than you do.
no. Let's see here. Okay, so that's all that I have. Does anyone have any announcements or anything? Yeah, prayer requests or anything? Oh.
I would like prayers for my son's family. Last weekend, I don't know what they were thinking, but his stepson's about to have a baby. And well, I mean, he's not going to have a baby, but they are going to have a baby. And they had a baby shower last week. And the entire extended family came to the baby shower. And then on Tuesday, Caleb, the father, was not feeling well, went to the doctor, and he has COVID. And 2 other people have tested positive since then, and we don't know, you know. My son has had a test, but it hasn't come back yet. So I just would like prayers for the well-being of that entire family.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. For sure, we'll remember them. COVID, it's horrific, you know, some of this, and then the uncertainty. Even now, it's come closer to my home as well with my daughter. There was a boy in one of her classes that I think his family's quarantining now, and so I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know, you know, it's like, don't know what to do. And times like this, just wash your hands and, you know, hand sanitizer and all that. So definitely understand that type of situation. Anyone else have any other prayer requests?
No, my daughter and her husband had it, and they're both in their 50s and they recovered, and but they haven't regained their sense of smell.
Wow, goodness.
So still think about it. and they're quite healthy, pretty athletic people. So they're not sure where they got it. They think at their office, someone brought it to the office. And
We'll definitely remember them in our prayers as well. So next week is chapter 9, and the theme is welcoming the stranger, racial injustice, and fixing our broken immigration system. And so I will share the screen for the closing prayer if there's anybody that wants to lead us in our closing prayer.
I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for another good discussion. And I hope you all have a terrific week coming up. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Birdie.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Birdie.
Birdie. Thank you.